Welcome to another episode of Tax Leaders Unplugged. Our guest today is Bill Nolde, and Bill is the SVP Head of Finance at DraftKings, a Nasdaq-listed multinational, and he oversees in this role tax, treasury, FP&A, internal audit, and procurement. Before, Bill had many tax leadership roles in large multinationals like Avnet and Isagenix, and he started his career at KPMG. Bill is based in Arizona in the US. And in this episode, we will discuss the journey from tax to finance leader and how Bill successfully transformed from managing the tax function into becoming responsible for a big chunk of the CFO office, including tax, treasury, FP&A, and more.
This podcast is brought to you by LockTax.
LockTax is an autonomous control center for your global tax operations. It streamlines tax compliance with AI-driven insights and workflow automation. It helps to stay in control of tax risk and controversy management, and this system of action empowers tax teams with real-time analytics and regulatory updates, ensuring proactive business support. LockTax, on top of that, helps in-house teams to keep up with the digitalization that is happening at the site of the tax authorities. Transform your tax function with LockTax and ensure it is future-proof and AI-ready. Welcome, Bill.
Oh, thank you, Stevie. I appreciate it.
So, Bill, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile. Obviously, we know each other. We have a shared working experience at Avnet back in the days. But I was looking back at your LinkedIn profile, and I saw that you have a really impressive track record in volunteering. I, for example, saw that you're on the advisory board of an Arizona-based business school, that you're a member of the board of the USA Track and Field Foundation, also are active for the Live Love organization, which is into community development and human rights, if I understand it well. And there is even more. Tell us a bit, like, what drives you to do all of those side hustles on top of your already impressive leadership role? How and why do you do it?
Yeah, I've always thought it was an important part of, I've had people along the way help me in my career. Even back in the day when I was doing sports, coaches and mentors who kind of helped, spend time, volunteer, and help me grow. I've had leaders in business who've done the same and taken time out of their schedule to share about what they've learned and future, opportunities that were there. So for me, giving back is just something like, it looks different for everyone, but for me, it looks like, volunteer work, it's serving on boards. How can I help? Particularly and it usually starts off with like Live Love, for instance. I've been doing that for almost 15 years at this point. And it started with volunteering. I'd go pull weeds, I'd meet neighbors, just help on a Saturday morning, cleaning yards, getting to know people. And then of course, life gets busy. And it's like, okay, well, I can't do that anymore, but what else can I do? Well, hey, you want to be on our board? And so then all of a sudden now you're a board member. So some of these things I work more behind the scenes because the schedule allows that, the day-to-day grind of the work. But the schedule allows me to do that. And I just think it's important as we're moving up to kind of keep in mind that people help get you there. So you should do your best to help people, strive for something greater. And I do the same thing with college kids, high school kids that I mentor. I coach cross country as well, where I get to mentor, high school age kids who some just need to know, what's opportunities out there. I don't want to go to college. I want to go to college. How did you know what you want to do for a career? Why do you work so much? And just all these random questions you get from kids. And I always think it's important to make sure you're giving back. It just looks different. And for me, that's kind of, how it worked out for me.
So this is about giving back. Do you also get something in return in terms of how it shapes you as a person, as a leader, maybe privately, professionally?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's, every time I volunteer or do something, especially the big stuff, you do big events, big service events, or you go on, I do some mission trips as well, down to Mexico. I've been to Haiti, some trips like that. You come back a changed person, no doubt. Because then you realize what you've been given and the opportunities we are given on a day-to-day basis that maybe we don't realize. And you're like, oh, that's just, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. But in reality, those are all opportunities that you're passing on and doing some of these things and looking at where other people are having to start their career or their journey or where they're at and being able to go in and help them actually gives you back even more. It gives you gratitude for what you have and really makes you not want to miss those opportunities that come along, because sometimes they only come along once and you got to jump on and go with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You also refer to coaching students. Tell us a bit about that. Is this tax related or?
Yeah, so I do some presentations for college age students, kind of on some topics that are not so much tax related, but they're business related. But I also, with the high school cross country, I get to talk to that age of student as well. And so, like I said, I just love sharing, what I know and kind of hearing the questions and really what resonates in their hearts, because I think it's important not only to see like, the people I lead on a day-to-day basis, the next generation that are 13 to 22 and in university and in high school, like eventually they're going to be in the workforce. And it's important to know where they're coming from, what they care about in their day to day, so that eventually, I can meet their needs. Because I can tell you it's changed a lot over the almost 30 years of my career of doing this. What people cared about then is not what people care about now.
Cool. What are some of the things that you tell them, what you teach them?
I tell them about, just in terms of the hard work it takes to kind of continue to advance. So there are sacrifices along the way that we have to make,
Yeah.
of course, but it's also important to balance the sacrifices. And I think that's one of the key things I've learned over my career. Like I'm willing to give up certain things, but then there's other that are non-negotiable. So like time with the family, getting some rest occasionally throughout the week, keeping time for the passions that I do enjoy, which you mentioned some of them with track and field and
Yeah.
serving. Like I have to have time to do that because that actually energizes me, and it makes me a better leader. But it doesn't go without work, right? Like end of the day, it's hard work to be successful. We all know that. And as soon as we stop striving for that next level, someone else is trying to get to that next level, and you always gotta be, trying to figure out what's next in your life, and have a vision for it. So I just try to remind them all that. And a lot of times, they're young and they're having fun, and that's the most important thing, and that's fine. There's a place for that. And it's like, but when you're ready, these are the things that you kind of need to start to think about. And I've actually created like a list of 10 things that I share with the students in terms of things I focus on as I look back, on my career, and I wish I would have known when I was their age. So it's a fun dialogue.
Can you share a couple of items from the list?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So one of the things I always focus on, make your boss look good. Now, I don't know what that looks like for people, but end of the day, like if you think about life, like if your boss is successful, there's a good chance you're going to be successful. And
Yeah.
I've seen people try to undermine their boss over my career, and that doesn't do anybody any good. So trying to do that, like we talked about, hard work, discipline, and sacrifice, like that just comes with the day to day. That's just things we have to do. You probably know it when you jumped off to start your business, right? It's a lot of work, right? You could have stayed in your normal job that you were good at, but you took a chance, and there was a lot of work probably involved in that. Um, Prioritizing, compartmentalizing, competing demands. Like I get decisions that have to be made every day, and if I don't actually find time to focus on them, they're still there the next day and the next day. And what you realize is that eventually people get frustrated if you're not actually making decisions. So really figuring that out early is good. The other one is never compromise who you are for any job or person. Like if you're in a toxic environment, you're in an unhealthy environment for you as an individual, it's time to make a change. Like you can't expect the organization or the person you report to or the culture to change. Sometimes you just have to leave that situation, and that's totally acceptable. The career part, your career is a marathon. I think a lot of people want to move up the chain quick. I see that a lot in today's society. And as much as we'd like to, you might get lucky in the right company with a high growth startup where things are going, you're getting paid above your pay raise, you're literally going level. But in most cases, that's not how it works. And you just have to be comfortable with that, and be really good at where you're at and do the best you can. And good things will come.
Nice.
The sixth one, chart your own course. Like that one, for me is relevant because I decided, back when we were at Avnet back in the day, we worked together. I decided I needed something more. And that's when I started to make my decision to head a different path and try to get more into a CFO type role, more business based. And so I had to make those decisions. And so it was like you make a couple decisions and you take an action, and then you
Yeah.
do that for a while, and then eventually you make another decision, take some more action. So it's up to you. I see a lot of people who come to me and they don't know what they want in their career. And it's important to know what you want, and that's the personal side and the business side, because they have to manage well together. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Um, and then other than that, like work yourself out of your job. That's one that I think shocks people when I say it. But at the end of the day, you got to develop your team. And if you develop your team well, and it's nervous the first couple of times because you're like, well, I literally trained this person to do everything I do at this point. So I'm either going to have to move out of the organization or they're going to have to move me up. But you have to get comfortable with that, because one, even if you develop them to do what you're doing, the whole team's going to be more successful. And as long as you've been having the right conversations with your leaders, you're going to kind of know where you stand after that. And so it's important to do that. Work yourself out of a job. Not, you don't want to be unemployed, of course, but it's important to try to know what you want. And so you got to build that team, get them caught up so you can advance in your career. And then
I love that.
yeah, be kind and treat people with respect and dignity. I think that's just part of the day to day.
Yeah.
I think it gets hard. We get under pressure, and sometimes you can demand things from people, but it's always better to treat them like individuals, and know that you have their best interest in mind all the time. Like I can force people to do things, but that's short term. Like I'm trying to build long-term teams, long-term relationships with people, because you never know when those people and opportunities show back up in your life, and it pays off. And then last thing would be transition from a doer to a thinker. I think we have to start somewhere. Do the do, spend the time in the trenches. If you're in tax, like learn what that means. You gotta be able to do tax returns and compliance. And you know what? For some of us, the world's getting better because of AI, but for some of us, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. But you have to be a good, subject matter expert on it, and then you can go off and do great things and be that thinker that solves huge problems and deals with, big global planning opportunities, and talking with, heads of treasury here in the US, which is some things I get to do, like just exciting things that, can come about it. But if you don't build that base of like, I'm good at this, and I've worked really hard to learn this, and I've been doing it. And now I want to expand, because now I've got some thoughts on where we can take this organization, this department, this group of people, whatever that may be. So those are kind of the things I share. It's not all tax related. Obviously, it's just more about, if I would have known some of these things back in the day, I would have spent my first 5 to 10 years of my career differently, and not really, complained as much as I probably did back in the day to my wife and at the time. So,
No,
those are the tips.
I like it. It's indeed like general wisdoms, and makes sense to have them, like, I don't know, print them somewhere and read them regularly, because these are things we all know them, but we tend to forget them in the day to day. And it reminds me a bit about the book of Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But this is then the 10 general wisdoms of Bill Nolde for effective leadership, or whatever we want to call it. But I love it. Very nice, very nice list.
And like you said, I do have them written down. They're written down in my LinkedIn. So
cool.
It's one of those things people need to realize: social media, right? And I tell my kids this all the time, as I've got some going into the workforce now. Hey, remember all that stuff you put on your posts and stuff? People are going to read it at some point. It doesn't really go away. So you really need to be careful. How are you portraying yourself to the outside? Is it negative thoughts? Is it positive thoughts? Like, how do you want to be viewed? And remember, that stuff is there. And so, yes, I posted this probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I'm sure if I go out there, it's still there. And if I would have posted like the 10 things to derail a business, and I put that out there, that would be out there too. So be careful what you post, because your employers at some point. I'm a big social media stalker. I like to kind of just get a background and a feel for who people are and what they're interested in. Because I think it's good for the culture.
Yeah, and it's so true about your online legacy. Be careful with that. But good for the audience that they can find these 10 rules, 10 wisdoms on your LinkedIn page, right?
Yep, of
Yep.
course.
So, Bill, if you drop the concept of tax for your students, what is the sentiment? What is the first reaction you get? If you ever tried that out, or do you shy away from the topic and you keep it more generalistic leadership?
No, they don't get really excited when they hear that there's a tax person coming to talk to them. I don't know why. Like, we're just not viewed as the most exciting people in the world, apparently. Um, a couple will show interest, but usually it's like, no, that's not for me. I want to be an auditor. I want to be, a cost accountant or something. And so I try to share with them what I do in these classes, because I also do the same over at San Diego State and ASU, which are my two alma maters. I just try to share with them like where this career could take you. And I think it's important for people to realize that, what does tax mean? Working with the government, working with regulators, you know, impacting for public companies, your earnings per share, which is really important, right? We can drive the business in a lot of ways. We could be a favorable impact to the business or very unfavorable if we don't have things buttoned up. And of course, any leader doesn't like surprises, right? We work in the no surprise zone, particularly in the tax world, because the numbers can get very big very quick. Um,
Absolutely.
but I like to share with the students about like the opportunities that I've seen and kind of where it's taken my career. Just from like, yeah, it started out here, but you got to realize like with that skill set, there's so much that you can do, and just try to continue to instill the importance of, whether it's accounting or tax or anything, like it's still a very needed, position in this world. And at least here in the States, we do have a lack of accountants. We have a problem with the school system,
Yeah.
because, I want to be a social media influence, Bill. I don't want to be a tax person. I'm like, well, you could be both. Why can't you be both? But get a skill set that's actually going to be valuable to your career, but also businesses, and they're going to want to keep you around, keep you employed, help you have them, drive their business.
Yeah.
And then on the side, you can start a social media influencer career. That's totally fine. I know there's some of them are actually very funny. I do enjoy them. Um, but I think a lot of kids saw the easy way out of like, I can make hundreds of thousands of dollars, doing XYZ. Why would I go become an accountant? Because it's boring. And I try to change their mind. It's tough
Yeah, yeah,
sometimes, but I try.
and that brings us back to your 10 rules. Like, also, if you want to be an influencer, you need to put in the hard work. Nothing comes
Mhm.
for free. It's also there. It's a different
Yeah.
type of career, but it's also hard work. So, no, I
Yeah.
like that. And what I do like as well is that tax leaders in general should be prepared to have a kind of an elevator pitch to promote tax, because to your point, we are in need of
Mhm.
more junior tax people, more influx of new tax people, because, yeah, the domain needs it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. And you talk to any of the big four or others, and they're all in the same situation, trying to find good talent. And there's just not a lot of kids coming out of university with the degree.
Absolutely. So for today, I want to zoom in a bit on your career, and in particular, like your impressive transition from tax leader to finance leader. So tell us a bit, like what inspired you to make that shift. You already mentioned that, if I
Mhm.
understood you well, from the beginning, you knew that tax was not the end destination for you. It was a good start of your career, but you were always like hungry for more. But tell us a bit, and inspire maybe the audience a bit. Why would you look for a career beyond tax?
Mhm. Yeah, I think I'm just wired to look at the big picture all the time and try to set vision for things. And so early on in my career, back at KPMG, like you were just a machine pumping out tax returns, getting really good at that. You
Yeah.
never really saw the big picture, and that was fine. That's probably where it should be at that point. When I got to my next company, which was the Fortune 100 company globally that we worked at, much bigger company, like huge organization, but I found myself again like we have a big tax department. We grew the tax department, and it's like tax, tax, tax. And I never really got the opportunity to see a lot of pieces of it.
Mhm.
So I was very inquisitive, like, well, how does this work? Why does it work this way? Why do they care? Like, obviously, we're tax people. We got the right answer. Why do they say no? Okay, well, maybe because I don't understand all the facts. So I always wanted to know how business ran. the behind the scenes, the nuts and bolts. I was grateful enough. I did an internship in my career, and when I was in college, and I got to go to Disney World for 2 weeks for leadership training as
Mhm.
part of that. And it was outstanding. What was more outstanding is they got every person, like we were tax people, but they got every group and function within their company. They took us on tours. They showed us the behind the scenes, how things work, how things operate. And I
Yeah.
was like, wow, this is awesome. Like, I love this stuff. And so it was probably like way back then where I realized like chief operating officer, like how do you understand the business? Like how do you drive results? Like get that mindset. So for me, my education on that wasn't an MBA. It was CNBC is what I would say it was. I've always been like a CNBC geek. So every morning I probably spend an hour or two when I'm reading emails, getting ready for work, just catching up on how's the economy, what's
Yeah.
going on, what's important, what should businesses care about. And then eventually, you understand the vernacular and you really do get some education, especially if you do it for as long as I've been doing it. And so I've always had the desire. It was just a matter of like, well, how am I going to get there?
Yeah. And so you have a very deep technical knowledge around tax accounting, tax
Mhm.
provision. Was that the first logical step in towards then more finance responsibilities, or how did that happen? Say
Mhm.
that if your career would have started into, I don't know, tax planning, tax projects, would the same have happened? Would you also have transitioned into the finance domain?
I would say probably not. And the one thing I will say to people coming out of school is it's important, I think, personally, to get your base in compliance, like tax compliance, preparing returns, understanding how things work, right? I think a lot of times you get swayed into consulting or like some specialty group where you do tax credits, for example, or tax
Yeah.
planning. But if you don't have the base, it's hard to move anywhere else after that. You almost silo yourself. So for me, it was the compliance background. And then I had been lucky enough at KPMG to do some provisions back in the day. And I did have a good working knowledge going into at Avnet, and there was a need. And so just kind of being part of that, but as part of that, like now you're talking to the SEC folks, you're talking to the CFO, you're getting like that EPS, the financial statements, the investors. And so it all starts to come together because you get to add all these components to what you do, as opposed to, hey, Treasury, I need to pay X amount for a cash tax payment that's due. No, now I get to see different functions and interact. And I think that was an important stepping stone to really broadening, my relationships within the organization, and then eventually my knowledge in the other areas about why do you care? Like why do you care about? Because I care about this, you care about that, but I don't understand why. And it was an important question throughout my time is like, but why? I don't understand. And so luckily we had gracious people who would explain their why, and that made us all a better team.
I get that. I like the fact that you like put the spotlight here on the importance on tax accounting, tax provision,
Mhm.
like the non-sexy stuff, but the stuff that is so important because in the end, whatever a company does, it will always hit the return in one way or another, right?
Mhm.
So, what would be your elevator pitch for new people in the tax domain to get started in accounting, in compliance, in provision,
Mhm.
and not in planning? What would
Mhm.
be like the your promotional stuff
Yeah,
around
yeah.
that?
I would say, to go back to my running days, I ran for a long time and I coach, and I always tell the kids, you know, the bigger the base, meaning training, how much training you get, the bigger the base, the higher the mountain. So the higher the peak.
Mm,
Right. And we tell the kids that all the time in running because it is important. Like you want to go run a fast 800 meter, fast 1600 meter. That doesn't mean you run a half a mile or a mile every day. No, you run 5 or 6 miles a day, get the base, the strength. And then we get the speed going after that. And then you hit your peak. So in this sense, it's like, yeah, you get your base, and that's the day-to-day compliance. That's charts of accounts. It's learning how to do journal entries. It's learning how it impacts other things. It's being organized, like, because that's one of the big faults I see of like accountants. As accountants, we have to be super organized, and it's important to have a system and a process. And technology has helped a great deal nowadays in terms of getting us there, and it's only going to get better. And the one fear that I have is with technology that we figure out how to automate the returns so much and the tax adjustments and stuff that people coming out of school don't ever learn it. And you have to be able to fall back on those skills. So we'll see what evolves here, but definitely build a base of compliance, the day-to-day, maybe sometimes the boring stuff, because it's going to lead to the opportunities that hopefully everybody wants to achieve more, wants to grow in their career. And that's what did it for me. And I would never have gone back and done anything different. I mean, I almost jumped off at a point in my career when I was at KPMG because I got into tax because I love to be a lawyer though. So, but I was going to do a rotation in Washington, D.C. And it was 2 years, all research. And I would have gotten very good at a specific area, but not the whole thing. I would have been a subject matter expert. And I think that would have derailed my career to an extent because then I would have lost some of the compliance and then spent so much time being like this, as opposed to really, I want to do all of this a little
Yeah.
bit. So,
in your current role, as I said in the introduction, so now you're overlooking multiple parts of the CFO office. So as a finance leader, so this includes treasury, FP&A, internal audit, procurement. Correct me if I'm wrong.
correct.
How is your tax background helping in also overseeing those other parts of the CFO office or the finance function? How has it shaped you? Did your tax background constitute a Kickstarter to get a better understanding of all of this because you were already working in one way or another closely with those departments? Tell us a bit.
Yeah. I think a lot of it came down to, you get to meet people and you understand, where they're coming from in the tax world, right? Because you're meeting with lots of stakeholders. And the question was always, like I said earlier, like the why question, like, but why do you care? And so the skills I learned in tax that have helped me the most, I would say, in these other roles has been more the leadership part of it. And it's more like leading teams, developing teams, learning how to get things done.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest part that's translated. But what it's done, which has been interesting to me, is now I've learned so much about FP&A and treasury and internal audit and like how they all work that it's like, oh, did you know that we could totally save money? Hold on a second. And then I'll go talk to my tax director and I'll be like, hey, you guys need to talk. So I've become like a networker a little bit. I wouldn't say social media influencer, but a different influencer to just kind of drive discussions because I'm like, okay, I know how this tax side is going to be impacted by that decision. And we had one come up recently about, an award trip and if it was taxable to the employees. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Where are we at the planning in this thing? Because we can help with this. It's like, oh, we just started talking about it. Okay, we'll help solve that problem. And so the ability to lead people and the ability to network and just share your knowledge, whatever that may be, with others, eventually it just leads to just a collaboration that yields great results. And that's kind of what I've seen as I've kind of evolved in going through this.
Are finance leaders or CFOs with a tax background better finance leaders, or what is in your eyes the best background to evolve into a finance leadership role? Because I truly understand that tax is very helpful, but most CFOs don't have a tax background. Should we have more CFOs or finance leaders who do have a tax background, and why?
I would say, well, if they're better or not, I'll let you know in a couple of years. Hopefully, we'll find out. But what I would say is definitely, I think everybody's is built different and has different background and experiences. And if you're in a senior executive type role within a finance organization, I don't see why you should not be considered for it. But again, it goes back to your background and experiences. And I'll say for me, there's definitely luck in the journey. And I think we all need to realize that. Like the hard work, the discipline, the sacrifice, that has got to happen. But, luck is always a thing. And in this case, when I came over to DraftKings, I outlined, kind of where I was at in my career. And I said, hey, I would like to expand into other areas. And luckily for me, the company's been growing so much, it created opportunities. And the first one that came my way was our chief accounting officer had left. And they said, well, you're probably the closest person we know to doing financial statements and SEC reporting and working with our audit team. So do you mind taking that over? And I learned a ton in the year that I did it.
Yeah.
So not only did I get to meet a whole nother group of 70 accounting people and develop relationships with them, but I also got the kind of, okay, what does the CAO care about? Like, okay, I have a working knowledge, but I have never done it. And it gave me a whole nother respect for what that role does and what they bring to the table. So that was a huge benefit. And then, we eventually hired a new CAO, and at the same point, we were having a new CFO step in internally. So that created a, hey, Bill, we know what your desires and you've proven yourself here and here. So will you take over, keep the tax, but take over all of my old responsibilities?
Yeah.
Like, sure, let's give it a shot. So some of them I had done before. I was lucky enough to have a treasury and FP&A at my prior job at a much smaller company. But the reason I went to a smaller company is to get my hands dirty in other areas, right?
Yeah.
Because I knew you can't just necessarily jump right away. But I'd seen it, I'd done it. I did debt offerings, I did debt refinancing, I did forecasting and analysis. So different scale, but same process. And then now we take it and we bigger company.
Yeah.
So I do think with the right skill set and background and experiences, you can absolutely, as a senior leader, if you've worked your way up in an organization, there's no reason why you shouldn't be considered for a CFO type role.
Exactly. I can imagine, like, if you evolve from having started very technically into leadership, that you need to let go of the technicalities. How do you deal with that? Are you still keeping up with like the latest on new tax regulations and all the exciting stuff for us tax nerds, or are you completely out of it and you leave it up for your team and maybe every now and then you get an update? Tell us a bit.
Mhm. This goes back to one of my points of working yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
It can be nerve wracking. You have to be uncomfortable sometimes. And it is hard because it's if you think of it as like, you this is who you are back, all these years, and are you willing to give up some of it so
Yeah.
that you can do something different? So definitely an interesting transition. I deal with it for the last several years, just thinking back. Now, to your question, we have good advisors. I have a great team on the tech side. As many know, I get an update if, say, I don't know, research and development changes are coming.
Yeah.
Um, every firm in the world will publish something. So I might not read all of them any longer, but I will read one of them. So I do as much as I need to do to stay attuned. And then I raise the flag to my team to be like, hey, go take a look at this. Let me know what you think. And then we'll dialogue. Whereas in the past, I would see it, I would take the lead, I would do the research, and I would get back
Yeah.
to the group. So it's a different touch, but it's the same. But you have to have good people in place. You have to trust your team, empower your team always. Because again, they're there to support you. I'm there to make sure that I remove roadblocks that are in their way. I give them the support they need, and it works out very well. But yeah, you have to let go of like what your bread and butter was all those years if you want an opportunity to do something different. And it's scary, but the way I viewed it is like, I think I'm good enough. I think I've got a good enough background to give it a shot. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, I'll find another job. It's fine. Like, you know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, like the tax knowledge is there. And I've seen plenty of people go off and do consulting for a period of time, and then an opening happens, and then they jump back in. And so I don't worry too much about the failure part or if it doesn't work out. I think more about the opportunities and the development I'm getting. And if along the way it takes a detour that I wasn't expecting, I'll deal with it.
Because that's an interesting one, because I hear regularly that even people who it say at the beginning of their career they transition from advisory to in-house, they are a bit of afraid to what you're saying, to give up on like your bread and butter, your core expertise. You're trained in corporate tax and now you go in-house and you need to look after VAT and transfer pricing and whatnot. So you give up a bit of your deep expertise. What is your view like? Because you seem to be very confident that if you need to go back to the technicalities in, say, 5 years down the road, you
Mhm.
will manage to get there. Is
Mhm.
that is my understanding correct? You are not
Yeah.
really afraid that you have maybe missed the pillar two train or whatever, and that you
Mhm.
will be struggling to catch up?
No, we've done pillar two planning, So no, so I have a working knowledge enough where I'm confident that I can go back in and lead an organization, specifically in tax, if that's what it becomes. But my tax advisor I have a key tax advisor, and they know, hey, I hire you to watch my back. So I'm coming up with my list of things we worry about. But if there's other things coming down the pipeline, I expect a text or a phone call so that I can then focus over here. Because that's the biggest issue is like, if you've got 5 or 6 areas of responsibility, how much time can you focus on each one each week?
Yeah.
Right. But it's a matter of like, are you spending time in the right areas? And sometimes like IRS exams pick up. I got to focus more time. What's the issue? What's the topic? Get caught up quickly. But what you realize is like all that historic knowledge, it's like riding a bike. It comes back very quickly. And it's like, okay, let me fill the gap on the new stuff real quick. And here we go. So it's always possible. It's just about, you don't want to leave it like forever, but just know it's there. You spend time on it, you invest in it. And sometimes you just have to shift on a week to week basis. Like, I need more tax this week. You know what? It's light, it's compliance season. The team's doing a great job. FP&A needs more help, or we're trying to close a deal over here with some M&A. So I got to do more over here. So it's just a balancing act. And you hope you make the right decision of where you spent your time. We all do the same thing every week. Like, you can exercise or you cannot, right? And I carve out time, and some days are like, I got the whole hour. Some days I got 10 minutes. So it's like, am I going to make up for that time later? Or is this just a week where I know I'm not exercising? But next week, I'm going to promise to myself, so you just got to balance, and it's a tug and pull sometimes, but it works out.
I have another question which popped up, which is a burning topic, I think, in the tax world, where tax people, they struggle to convince the CFO in generally on tax topics, on tax projects they are doing, on getting the resources they need for doing their tax work. You as a finance leader, on the one hand, first of all, what are tax KPIs that for every finance leader should be top of mind? Because I guess in the audience, we typically also have finance leaders. What are the true North Stars tax-wise that a finance leader should have? Because you are in a very unique position there to maybe give your opinion.
I'd say from a KPI perspective, we focus a lot on cash tax and effective tax rates, right? It kind of depends on
Yeah.
we kind of have an idea, we have a forecast out many years, and it's like, obviously the business is going to do what the business does, and we'll adjust accordingly. But how well are we doing, right?
Yeah.
And how well are we doing? You talk to the firms, and it's like, well, how well are we doing next to our peers? Are we in line, or are we not? So we focus on that a lot. I'd say the other thing is like on the audit front, like the no surprise zone, right? It's really communication. It's managing that, right? You don't always win and lose. It's not a win or lose. It's just something. Auditors have a job, we have a job, and it's really like, how do you balance that? And a lot of it is communication, not only with the auditor, but then also with your CFO to keep them updated on how things are coming along. Because the last thing we need to do is a big assessment comes through and they weren't made aware. And that usually doesn't end well for anyone. And in terms of like influencing your CFO, the thing I've learned the most, and because it happens to me quite often, is like, you need to leave breadcrumbs. Like generally you meet with your CFO at least once a week. And as things are coming down the line, whether it's planning opportunities, audits, like this could go the wrong way. I don't know the result, but starting to like message that. So in their mind, they're understanding like something may come and they can be prepared for it. Because if you think about the communication structure generally, if I don't tell my CFO something's coming and something comes, well, now he's got to go tell the CEO, and that makes him look bad. And you remember one of my rules was don't make your boss look bad, like make your boss look good. And so leaving breadcrumbs about anything, like if I think I'm going to need headcount because I know BEPS is going to blow up and pillar two and all sorts of things are going to happen, digital taxes, like we don't have enough resources. I think this is going to become important. So I'm going to start to message it with numbers. Here's kind of seeing like worst case scenario. This is how much it could be, but there are some opportunities, but we really need to get ahead of it and then leave it. And
so
then
that is thinking ahead, but is that only about bad news or can it also be about good stuff?
Oh, it's good stuff too. Yeah. Good stuff though, you can surprise people with more often. And the reason I do the bad stuff because you don't want to surprise. You want to make sure they're forewarned. If
Yeah.
I give someone a good surprise, but yeah, of course. And it's always good to balance the two in the conversation. If it's bad every week, it's going to be like, come on, Bill, the sky's falling. Like it can't be this bad. Also tell me the good things. So I do try to balance them. It just tends that my communication is more on the things that could be a risk factor to the company as opposed to, hey, we got a $30 million opportunity. I'm working on it. I'll get back to you in 6 months when we're done. I'll let you know where we landed. Like that'll be the conversation and it'll just die.
Yeah.
And I'll go out and do it. But in terms of the other ones, I make sure the bad ones, that can be seen because that's where, we call them CLMs, career limiting moves. You don't want to have too many of those in your career. So if you
Yeah.
communicate them and they understand and they can comprehend and you're updating on a regular basis, then when the good and the bad come, that you're usually okay.
Yeah, and I like the trickle down effect that a CLM for you can also become one of your manager if you don't manage that properly. So
Totally.
yeah, that's cool. Maybe zooming back on your tax side of the career, like you have built a lot of tax teams. We have most of the audience are tax people. Tell us a bit like what was your secret sauce for building the highest performing tax teams? What would you give as takeaways to the audience here? What does it take to build high performing tax teams?
Yeah. But luckily, when I was at Avnet, I was there for almost 15 years. And when I started, there were 5 people globally on the tax team.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, the team got very big. I think last check when I was there was about 50. So we had teams
Yeah.
over in Asia, over in Europe, and in the US, of course, we were headquartered. Um, and I learned a lot through that process, right? All along, you have to make a decision on what type of team you want to have. Do you want to have a real co-sourced function? Do you want to have an outsourced function? Do you want to have an in-source function?
Yeah.
And I think they all work. It just depends on the situation. But currently, like for our team, we're more of an outsourced function. And then, you over time look at areas where does it make sense? Do I see a skill set in the market that currently I could bring in house that could really help our team? And then what does that do on the other side? Because you got to balance the dollars always, right? So if I bring something in, I got to pull in some work to go along, so my non-comp fees go down. So that's kind of how I look at it. And in terms of like finding the right people, for me, attributes that I look for are people that, I love former athletes, people that are high performers. I just feel like I'd rather manage that type of personality, someone that's trying to get a promotion every year, and I have to keep having a conversation with them because that means they care and they're going to keep coming and trying to make things better.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I've learned over my career when, if we start off in Big Four or some consulting firm, like you feel like life is crazy, right? Like busy, busy, busy. I'm going to take an easy corporate job. Well, you know what? Corporate jobs aren't always easy, right? Some are, but others aren't. And it depends the organization you get into. So what I realize is I do better in those like busy, like high performing corporate environments. But that also means we don't have the infrastructure to do the types of training and development that we would like to do. Because while I would like to go take a junior person out of college or a 1 to 2 year person and bring them on my team and we'll train them for what they need to know. No. It's in my experience, you take people who've been there, done that have 4 to 5 years of public accounting or some kind of big, broad experience where they've been trained really well on the basics. And now I can bring them in and show them like, okay, now here in this instance, here's how DraftKings will do it. Here's how the business works. And once they get that, they can hit the ground running. But if you bring them in too early and you don't have the manpower to develop them and train them the right way, they're not going to be able to develop. And it's a fail for the employee you brought in, but also for the organization. So it's facts and circumstance based on like your type of organization. But if you're in a high performing, high growth, always busy type of environment, maybe sometimes you just outsource the whole time and you don't bring in the people because it needs to flux so much in terms of the resource needs. And each one's different. But for me, the quality of the candidates I've gotten out of a Big Four type environment or some kind of public accounting, firm where they were there for 4 or 5 years or even longer,
Yeah.
You can't do that kind of training inside, I don't believe,
Yeah.
as well as those firms do it. So that's the quality that I look for amongst the rest of the attributes that are important
Yeah.
to integrate with your team and have the right culture. And so it's not just a skill set, you're really good at tax, but you have to fit the culture that we have, because that's a whole lot of, Stevie, you spend a lot of time with people in work, sometimes more than your family. And it's important that people like each other, get along, can jive, can, throw shots at each other, have fun, commiserate, all that good stuff while getting the job done.
Yeah. No, and then so I understand you elaborated a lot in the beginning of the podcast about it, like the essence or the need of having your technicalities, your foundations, your basis. Yeah, you refer to running or training and the foundations you need to have. So I hear on the other hand also every now and then voices that say like, no, more and more we need to have generalists from the beginning, not like deeply trained in say tax accounting or in compliance or tax provision, but more like generalists from the beginning. Because if you look at your career, you are now becoming more and more a generalist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
you seem to have an opposite position there where you say like, no, I stick to the old school way of careers, big four
Mm-hmm.
public accounting first, go deep into the technicalities, and then you go in-house and more you become a generalist. Is that
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to like, your career is a marathon. It's not you're going to work for 15, 20, 25 years, however long that may to invest, 4 to 5 years into being like a deep thinker in an area.
Yeah.
I don't think derails your career at all. Now, could other ways work? Like I could see someone who did tax for 5 years and then decides to go, I'm going to take a step down. I'm going to be a senior associate in this public accounting firm and go to the audit side now. And you do that for 5 years and you're not worried about title at that point. You're worried about developing the base and broadening the base. That's another good career path because now you've got even more options and more value to add to an organization at some point in the future if that's the
Yeah.
path you choose. But I do think you got to have something that's like your anchor that you're good at. And then from there you build it and you grow it and just think of it as a long journey, and if you think about it as a short sprint, you may make decisions that could derail your career maybe as you look down the road. But again, luck works itself out over time, and maybe I'm wrong and maybe someone steps into a role and they're very successful being more of that generalist mindset, but my view is to be a little bit deeper on the technical,
Yeah.
and build from there.
And you refer to the different tax operating models like outsource, insource, co-source. I hear that question coming up a lot of the time that people sometimes struggle a bit to understand whether they have the right tax operating model and sourcing model. What are drivers for one or the other? What are like criteria for having one or the other in your view? Because interestingly enough, as a finance leader, you look at a higher level and have maybe another view on it now. Can you explain a bit, like if you take the two extremes, fully outsourced, fully insourced,
Mhm.
what makes you up for one or the other?
I think, if you were to I think people do want to do fully insourced a lot because they think it'll be cheaper. Um, and that's not always the case, right? By the time you get the tools and stuff that you need to do returns and planning and all of that, and pillar two type analysis, like there's certain things you probably have to outsource. Um, but I think it depends on how well your firm is doing for you. If you have a team of 4 or 5 people, but then the firm is using 20 of their own people to kind of help you scale, and it's working well, then that's great. But sometimes they don't always meet the business demands, like the timing. Like
Yeah.
for instance, one of the discussions that's been, relevant recently for my team is, close the books quicker, get the discrete items and the reserves in sooner. Like I want that in before quarter end. Totally get it. That's where I come from.
Yeah.
But right now we're having to like change a little bit because the firms don't always have the expertise or the time. They're like, no, I do your provision like week 1, day 7 to day 15. It's like, no, but I need you to do it sooner. I'd have more control if I had my own team in house to do it
Yeah.
versus like maybe rely on the firm. So it really depends on, you lose control a little bit of the timing if you use a firm. You have more control if you use, of your day to day with your team, if you have an in-source team, but it comes with a lot of costs. And then you have to deal with turnover. And some people don't like to deal with turnover because it can be frequent at times. I'd rather sometimes the firms deal with the turnover. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry that you lost someone. Who's my new team member? I don't have to go recruit and interview and hire. So there's pros and cons of each. And I've used all of them. And, it just depends on your actual situation. And sometimes, depending on the organization and the direction it's going, cost might be the only factor. It might just be given to you and you say, cost is it, and we're willing to live with risk. Okay, then
Yeah,
that's what we'll do.
what I've seen a couple of times now, like in a more challenging microeconomic climate, is like pressure on the budget. We need to decrease the team. We need to work on SG&A savings. So we let go of a part of the team. We outsource more. It's cheaper. But obviously, to what you're saying, it comes also with then implications in terms of control, maybe management of those outsourced resources. But also, I guess, building your in-house memory, in-house tax knowledge, which is obviously something you need to have a sustainable continuation of the tax function. But yeah, overall, I think, very, very clear argumentation. And in general, I think, Bill, we are by the end of the podcast. I really loved the conversation. Very good insights, a lot of nuggets, pieces of gold, I think, that will truly resonate for the audience. But I have one final question, which I want to ask you, which I do to all the podcast guests, which is, if you would have one piece of advice for the audience, for, let's say, aspiring tax professionals looking to excel in their careers, what would that piece of advice be? One piece of advice that you want to share with the audience to get the most out of their career, knowing obviously that you have your top 10 list, but what is the one thing you want to share here?
Well, I'll steal a quote, but this is one that I use regularly. I use it in the sports realm as well, because I like to mix sports and business here. Learn to love the process, and eventually the process will learn to love you back. So I think a lot of people, you're going through it, and if you're not enjoying what you're doing in the process, then you need to find a new thing to do, right? But if you actually enjoy doing the work, working hard, being disciplined, that day where it may come back in a week, it may be 10 years down the road, but eventually, like, I'm a firm believer in all the work that you put in will eventually pay you back. It's just a matter of the time and when it decides it's time to pay you back. And some people aren't willing to continue to do the grind and to continue to develop themselves and build their skills. And, maybe they jump into a new career too soon. If you really do enjoy what you're doing and you love it, then just keep doing it, right? Keep mixing it up, adding new skills, and eventually that opportunity is going to come along, right? But sometimes if you're not enjoying it, then no, you may need to make a career change into something different. But if you love it, don't leave it. Like, don't leave it because I wanted to be promoted yesterday and I wasn't. Like, continue to build and build and build, and stack those days where, like, eventually all that training you're putting yourself through, that right opportunity is going to come along, and you're going to know it when you see it, and you're going to look back and be like, well, I'm glad I stuck with it. I loved it, the journey, because it's all about the journey at the end of the day. Like, that's where we spend our time. And then there's a couple of moments in your career where you're like, that's why I was doing it. And now I have my opportunity. But if I would have left, who knows?
Yeah, I love that. It's a kind of a bit of a variation on because you now mentioned the journey. The journey is the destination. It's somehow related to that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's all about, just, you got to love the process. You got to love the journey.
Yeah.
And then eventually all the work you're putting in, it'll love you back. It's just a matter of, like, when. And we all want it to be yesterday. And sometimes it's not yesterday.
I love that. Bill, thanks a lot for the conversation. I really liked it. As I said, a lot of value has been shared here. So thanks a lot for that.
Yeah. Appreciate you having me, Stevie. Glad to do it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye.